Today I wanted to talk about the latest book I finished reading, which is From the Desk of Zoe Washington. It's the debut novel by Janae Marks, and I absolutely loved it. By the time I finished the book, I loved everything about it. I'll tell you, it didn't start that way. I want to back up and tell you what this is about. This follows a 12-year-old who wants to be on a baking show. She's an aspiring baker, and she's such a compelling character. Immediately from the first page, I felt pulled in and I wanted to know this girl. I felt like I was feeling the things that she was dealing with as she approaches summer without the comfort of her best friend because there's been a falling out, and these things happen as you start to get older and try to be cool when you're friends with someone of the opposite gender. Sometimes these things happen, and sometimes that desire to fit in with a certain crowd breaks up long-standing friendships, and Zoe is right in the middle of dealing with that. But that's not at the heart of the plot of this story. There's something so much bigger going on, which is that on her 12th birthday, she gets a letter from her dad. Not her stepdad that she calls dad, the one she's always known, but from her biological dad, Marcus, who's in the state penitentiary. He's incarcerated because all she knows is that before she was born, he committed murder. She's never heard from him. She's never heard his voice until on her 12th birthday she gets this letter in the mail. And she has to think, am I going to correspond with him? Am I going to answer? And I think we can all guess, yes, she does. And that is the beginning of this lovely, riveting chain of events that introduces her to the complexities of our justice system. A justice system that does not always mete out justice. And I think as a kid, especially, we're taught in school that justice is blindfolded. We see these images of justice with the scales and a blindfold on. We are meant to believe that our whole judicial system, our courts, are impartial. That justice for me is the same as justice for you. And when we start to pull away the layers of that and realize that's not always the case, that's a tricky story. It's tricky for me. It's even trickier for Zoe, who is caught up in this because this is her dad who's incarcerated. This book is just an incredible invitation into the complexity of trying to figure out her own history, her dad's history, and also trying to learn more about her mom and why her mom has chosen to so completely cut her off from her dad. Now, I have to say, about a quarter of the way into this book, I wasn't so sure I was going to like it. Not because I didn't love the characters already or because the writing wasn't totally compelling, which it all was, but because I came to a point where as a mother, I was feeling like, oh my goodness, this girl is lying to her mother on like every other page. I'm not comfortable with this. I don't want to see this modeled. But you know what? Zoe isn't comfortable with it either. We start to realize the intense discomfort and agony that it's causing her, honestly, feeling like she is stuck in a position where she just doesn't have options, and why she feels like she can't be completely honest with her mother. And as the story went on, I started feeling like, wow, this is actually a conversation to have. What a great invitation into thinking through how do we as mothers, as parents, be safe people for our kids to be able to say anything to. I think that is so important, and you start to see what were the decisions, what was forming the mother's decision about how she parented. I think back to being a kid and feeling like there were some big things I couldn't tell my parents. Why did I feel that way? What was it that influenced their parenting that made me as a kid feel that I couldn't say anything. I couldn't say some things to them. Uh, it just is another interesting, really integral part of the story is this invitation to a complicated question of how do we become, how do we choose to be the kind of parents that a kid can say anything to. And so I really feel it's not about it being modeled that it's okay to lie to your mom. It's an invitation to really question, both as moms and as kids, how do we forge a relationship where it's safe to be completely honest, where you're invited to be completely honest about anything. And it's just one more thing I really came to love about this book. It made me uncomfortable at first. There are so many little parts of this book that step into uncomfortable territory and make that okay. And this really, I think it takes a lot of skill as an author to weave together so many elements in a way that just works and doesn't make you feel preached at, doesn't feel like heavy lifting emotionally, because it's like you're turning the pages of a mystery. Yeah, just another piece of it that I didn't think I was going to like and ended up, I was okay. I always like to read a little clip from the book when I do a review, and for me, a really moving part of this book, especially as a kid who grew up doing prison ministry way back in the early 80s when this wasn't really a thing, and knew a lot of incarcerated people. This is a part of my life that's so far in the past, but when I read this page of From the Desk of Zoe Washington, it took me right back and invited me into what it's like to know somebody who is incarcerated. And for the, so many kids that are often not represented in children's literature, having an incarcerated parent is not an unusual thing. It's unusual in books, and when we do find it in books, it tends to not be represented well. Actually, just last week I read this other book that I felt like tried to do a similar thing to what Janae Marks really succeeded with. And From the Desk of Zoe Washington, it's Junebug and the Reverend by Alice Mead. This is another book where, it's a black kid who lives in the city and his dad is also in jail. He also goes through some complicated moments with his mom. I was left feeling like this book really missed the mark. I didn't feel like the author knew any city kids or people whose kids were, people whose parents were in jail. It didn't ring authentically true. It didn't move me. I was left feeling like this was a really flat attempt to portray a kid with an incarcerated parent. And so I think it's something that is very, very rarely done well in children's literature, and this would be an example of a book where portraying a kid with an incarcerated parent is done really well. Let me read you this page that resonated with me. The millisecond that passed while I waited for Marcus to come on the line felt like a million years. I held my breath, but I didn't hear Marcus. Instead, a recording came on the line saying, "This is a collect call from an inmate at the Massachusetts State Penitentiary," before another person chimed in. Marcus Johnson. Marcus's voice. My eyes widened as Grandma stood there watching me. The other voice returned and said the call would be recorded and monitored, and to press 1 if I wanted to proceed. I could barely pay attention. I held onto the phone tighter so I wouldn't drop it. "It's him," I stuttered. It says I have to press 1, but I could barely move. That's the kind of writing that kept me turning pages through this whole book. I loved it. Down below, I am going to link some various resources that I have felt helpful as I have delved a little bit into The background of this story and the Innocence Project that is mentioned in here, the fact that so many people, and disproportionately Black people, are incarcerated often for long amounts of time on extremely little or falsified evidence. And this has been something that's really amazing to learn about. I'm also going to link the social media profiles of some of the lawyers that I have been following for a couple of years who first put this issue on my radar. But never before have I seen it show up in children's literature, and certainly not in such a compelling way. Again, loved this book. If you can't tell, loved it, loved it, loved it. Janae Marks is the author. This was her first book. Cannot wait to see what she writes next. Again, my name was Anna. This is Mommy Turns the Page. Thanks so much for joining me.